I think did you guys have the reporter who did like the seance on the news with them? You had them on this thing, I think, right?
Yeah, Laura DiDio and then
man.
Marvin Scott. They were both involved in that seance on March 6, 1976.
Hey, everybody, ghosts and ghoulies, friends. Welcome to another episode of the Scary Movie Project. I am your host, Matt. This is the podcast where we talk about scary movies and lots of scary stuff. So today is kind of a scary subject, I guess, right? I got my friend Blaine Duncan here from Halloween, one half of the Halloween Lives podcast, which I hope you saw our episode about all the Halloweens. He is going to join us today. He was a producer on a fabulous documentary called Amityville, an Origin Story. Limited series is the first ever elevated look at the strange alchemy of mass murder, 1970s paranormal obsession, and the explosion of the horror film genre that gave rise to the Amityville horror sensation. Mouthful. So the reality is every horror fan is obsessed with the Amityville horror. We go off on tangents on this show all the time about it. I've seen lots of documentaries. Who hasn't? I think this is the best one I've ever seen. This was so good. I know what I don't need to do a whole lot of talking. I just kind of want to ask and tell me how. Oh, so this is, by the way, available what on MGM Plus?
MGM Plus. Yeah, streaming on MGM Plus. Okay. It was released in late April, and it's been a hit so far. We've had a lot of really great comments and people reaching out to us and letting us know how much they love it. And I think they echo a lot of kind of what you just said, that there's been a lot of Amityville documentaries that have been done, but this just really takes it to a whole new level, and we really take a really deep dive into what happened, not only with the DeFeo case, but also the haunting and then subsequent movies and books and everything else. So, I appreciate the kind words.
So I've been to the house. I mean, I've been to the street, I should say. I walked around. I was respectful. I don't go on the property. I'm not someone that breaks into a house. I'm not going to do that. But so my first the overarching question I have for you is, one, did you go in the house? And then two, tell me how did you get into it? How did you get involved in making this and being a part of this?
Yeah, so to answer your first question, yes, I have been inside of the Amityville Horror House. I was not inside of it.
112 Ocean Avenue. Okay.
I have been, yeah. So and I'll kind of give you the rundown, the breakdown of that story. So I was into that house, or got into that house, before I was involved with the making of this series. I have been a longtime Amityville researcher, going all the way back to, I was 8 years old when I got this little book that I was at the grocery store with my mom. There was this little book on ghosts and hauntings, and I was like, hey, can I get this? And she said, sure. Yeah, exactly. I wish I still had it, but I don't. But I started reading it, and actually, it was my dad, believe it or not, who he was looking through it. And he's like, hey, you should read this story on Amityville. There's a whole movie and there's a book and all this stuff. And I was very into the paranormal as a kid, loved anything spooky, strange, scary. And so I read this and I just became obsessed with the story. And to the point that by the time I was 13, 14 years old, the internet was becoming a thing. And, I just started tracking down a lot of these people who were firsthand witnesses, had firsthand stories of not only the DeFeo story, but also the Lutz's case. I did my first podcast, or it was actually a radio show at the time when I was 16 years old, talking about the story and the research that I had done. At 17, I was going out and I was meeting with Suffolk County homicide detectives out in New York, talking about the case, looking at crime scene photos. People are probably like, what were your parents thinking? But they knew I was into it. I had a passion for it and really trying to discover what was going on. So fast forward to 2017, I had been to Amityville multiple times and seen the house multiple times. And through a friend of a friend, I was given basically the once in a lifetime opportunity to get into the house and to see it with my own eyes. The previous owner was moving out, and my friend had been in the house, and he knew, again, a friend of that former owner. And my friend had been in it once about 3 months prior. And I was actually coming back from a vacation. And when I got back from vacation, I was out of the country, and I turned my phone back on. And the first text message that I saw was from him, and it said, "You've got to bring your camera." And I was like, what is this about? And I started reading, and I had a million messages from him that she was moving out. And she said, "I'm going to give you guys one day to get into the house. You can take photos, you can do whatever. You're not allowed to share them. We can't let you share them, but you can take photos. Dude, it was an amazing experience. It is a gorgeous house. It's honestly, you've seen it. It's honestly much smaller than you see in the films.
It is.
But it's a beautiful house, and it's been renovated a lot inside, but there's still so much of it that is still original from when the DeFeos and the Lutzes lived there, the woodwork, the banisters, things like that. So as a longtime researcher and a longtime paranormal enthusiast, to get into that house and to get an opportunity that so many people, so many paranormal investigators would love to do, it was a dream come true. And hopefully one day I can get into it again. But if I don't, I will die with a smile on my face, because that was a dream that I had since I was an 8-year-old boy. And for that to happen, it was amazing.
I think that might be the best story we've ever had on this show.
It was awesome.
I have visited Transylvania, which I want to do forever. Awesome. I have touched the Stanley Cup.
Very cool.
Those are two things that I've waited my whole life for. I can't say I waited my whole life to go in that house, but I would certainly love to go in that house. That is a definitely bucket list thing.
Yeah.
That is a pretty cool story. That is very, very awesome. So besides excitement, obviously, anything, I mean, did you hear anything? Did you notice anything, or was it just, wow, I'm just too overwhelmingly excited to be in here?
Yeah. So, here's what I'll tell you is I am a paranormal researcher, paranormal enthusiast, but I look at things through a very skeptical lens. Like, something really has to be proven to me for me to believe that it's paranormal, right? I believe ghosts exist. I've had my own paranormal experiences, but I'm very, I really have to vet things out before I'll put a stamp on them that they're paranormal. I had two different things that happened to me in the house that I'm not saying are paranormal, but they were strange things that happened to me. Number one, when I first walked into the house, I walked into the entryway, into the foyer, and as you go into the house, the living room is on your left, there's a dining room on your right, and then the staircase, which goes up and you can see all the way up to the third floor, is directly in front of you. Yeah. I walked into the house and I became incredibly dizzy. Now, again, I'm not saying that that's paranormal, but a lot of times people have paranormal experiences where their equilibrium gets thrown off and they kind of lose this their feeling of balance and things like that. I had that happen, but that skeptical side of me says, you're getting into literally the one place in the world that you've always wanted to get into. Your excitement was at an all-time.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, my heart was probably pounding at 200 beats a minute, and my blood pressure was probably through the roof because I was number one. We were running way behind. We were supposed to be there like an hour earlier than the time that we actually got there. So I knew we were already kind of under the gun to get in, and that we were going to be meeting the owner there. So that happened again. I'm not saying it's paranormal, but it was something that's strange that I do remember. The other thing that happened, I was in the house for probably about 3.5 hours total. And at one point, my friend, his name is Jonathan, he's the one who got me into the house. He was kind of exploring on his own. I was sort of exploring on my own. And keep in mind, at this time, the owner was getting ready to move out. So this house was basically empty of all furniture. There was very, very little that was in it. But I believe he was on the second floor, and I was up on the third floor, in what would have been Don DeFeo's bedroom. It's the third floor bedroom that overlooks the river. The oldest daughter. Yeah, Don DeFeo. Yeah. She was 18 when she was murdered. And something I got very creeped out. I don't know what it was, but I was standing there and just kind of that feeling of like the house was very quiet. And again, I'm not saying it was paranormal, but I got that uneasy feeling, I guess. And so those were really the only two, I'll call them, experiences that I had. Once again, disclaimer, not saying that was paranormal by any means. And I don't believe that the house is haunted today. I really, truly don't. And we can talk, obviously, as we get further into the show about the Lutz's story, but I don't believe that house is haunted today, because if it was, I think we'd have a lot more stories about things that had happened in it over the years. But yeah, Matt, it was a great experience. Once in a lifetime. I'm one of very few researchers who've been in that house, especially over the last 40 years. They've really shut that down to everybody. So very, very fortunate to be given that opportunity.
Ooh. I've always said I would buy the house, and to be able to pay my mortgage, I would just have like a party once a month.
Right.
Charge people the amount of people you could pay every month. You'd be fine.
Exactly.
That's interesting, because that house gets sold. It's been sold numerous times. The price drops. I wouldn't want to live there, just not because I'm scared, because I don't want people gawking at my house all day long.
Yeah,
You know,
I agree.
Did you see the pool and the boathouse and everything in the back then too?
Yeah, so the pool is gone now. We went into the boathouse. What was really cool
Pool's
about
gone.
being in the
Okay.
boathouse was there was actually in the boathouse there was a sink that was sitting there, and it was actually an original sink from when the house was first
Mm.
built back in the 1920s, and it had essentially just
Wow.
been passed down from family to family to family. And this sink was just sitting there, and the owner was telling us, yeah, this was an original to the house, and basically the previous owners told them that they had been given it from the previous owner to them, and so on and so forth. And basically nobody had just ever thrown this thing away or either reinstalled it or used it in any capacity. So it was really cool to be looking at this thing going, wow, that's an original sink. But yeah, we were in the boathouse in the backyard, the red room, the famous red room that
The basement.
everybody knows. Yeah, the red room
Yep.
is gone. It's now a
Okay.
giant walk-in closet, but you can still see the exact kind of space that it was in. But that was a very small little kind of 3x4 area at the time when it was the quote unquote red room. And now it's this big giant like 12x10 walk-in closet underneath the stairs. And but it's a beautiful house, gorgeous. I too would love to own it. I think that'd be a dream come true, but it's an expensive house. And Amityville is an expensive area to live.
Oh my goodness.
And it's a gorgeous neighborhood.
So that's the corner of South Ireland Place, and then so if you just walk around, I mean, those are not $200,000 houses. I can tell you that.
No, they're not. No, and you're right. I think there's, I look at it from two different perspectives as far as the Gawkers go, because number one, I got into the house because I was invited into the house. I would have never trespassed, never gone on the property before that. Always was respectful, stayed on the street, stayed on the sidewalk. And so I understand why the owners get so upset when people do cross that line, and they have every right to be upset. There's actually a very, probably a lot of people don't know this, but there is a very serious security camera system in and around that house. And when I say in, I mean inside that house, there is a security camera system. And then there are multiple cameras positioned around the property. They are very in tune or very aware of the house that they live in. But at the same time, I also look at it and I go, man, you bought literally probably the most famous haunted house in the entire world. You have to expect for people to be coming and ringing your doorbell and knocking on your door and asking for tours. So I obviously respect their privacy, and I would never encourage anybody to trespass. But at the same time, you got to be a little bit understanding that you live in a famous house.
That's the whole thing. Yeah, you can't be naive about that. You cannot be stupid about that. So I was there maybe 20 minutes, half an hour, maybe something like that, and I would say 3 people during that small amount of time drove down the street, stopped, rolled the window down, took. I mean, it is happening literally every hour of the day. Like, it's crazy.
It is. But, and how long ago was it that you were there?
Oh my goodness, 2008, 2009. It was a very long time ago.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. It is.
Yeah, it was cool. It was amazing to be there. And I stood on the street. I did not step foot on their property. I did not ring their doorbell. I was respectful. I took photos, video, whatever. I'm on a public street. I can do that.
Exactly.
But to be able to go inside, wow. All right. So that being said, you got to do that. We could just have the whole show. We're done.
Yeah. Right.
That's it. So tell me, okay, so you've been doing all the work on it. You traveled to it. You've done the legwork. You've done the research. You've done the pre-production work. Mm-hmm. So what I love, just how this looks. So, I mean, I shoot, I produce, I run video all day long at my job. I do it. I make my own short stuff, whatever. I loved the way this looked, because this was not your 3-point lighting. We're all beautiful and we look great on TV. This was, you guys shot these things like in the dark, and the lighting was super low key with shadows. And the one shot of the guy with the staircase behind him was unbelievable. So talk me through like production stuff. Were these at these people's houses? Because these folks too, some of them are like old people. They've been around. They were there when the murders happened. They were 10 years old, younger, maybe in the 70s. They're in their 60s and 70s, maybe 80s now. So you guys are able to track people down. This wasn't just some news reporter or some expert talking about it. These are people that were there. This is the real stuff. This is incredible.
Right. And that was really the goal for this, is that we wanted this to be not a retelling from a third person perspective. We wanted to go and actually talk to people who maybe had never really told their story before, which we saw with several of our interviews that we conducted. But B, we just wanted it to be a first person telling of this story or retelling of this story, because these witnesses are not going to be around forever. I mean, let's face it, this is almost a 50-year-old case, and these people they're not going to be around forever. So, so a lot of the, all of the interviews that were done were just done on different locations. A lot of them, obviously, in New York. There was a couple that were down in Florida, and then of course in California we had a few. We had interviewed John Carpenter, who appeared in one, I believe, just one of the episodes. Might have been two, I can't remember now.
Briefly,
very briefly. Yep. And so they were all just done at different locations that were found by the production studio, and we wanted it obviously to have that dark and creepy effect. I mean, we didn't want to create a horror movie, but we did want to give that sense of that dark, just very scary looking sets, and I think we achieved that. And the cinematography that was done was fantastic. I mean, it was it was just a beautifully shot docuseries as well, which it turned out fantastic.
Those looked great. I mean, they look so good. You know, you had neighbors and George Lutz's old buddies, I guess, right? And and then you had was it Chris, one of the kids, one of the sons was in the show?
Yeah. So really, I've known Christopher for probably the better part of 20 years. I started talking with him when I was, 14, 15, 16 years old, something like that. And I had met him before in person, and I had also met his older brother, Danny. I was involved in the initial stages of another documentary that came out in 2000, I believe it was 2012, My Amityville Horror, which a buddy of mine, Eric Walter, shot. He did a fantastic job with that, where he interviews Danny.
I've heard of it. I haven't seen it though. Okay.
Yeah, it's really good. I'd encourage people to check it out. But so we got Christopher. That was a long process. Christopher kind of bounced back and forth of whether he wanted to do it, and we kept telling him, "Hey, man, we're doing this story justice, right? Do this at least for your mom. Your mom is not here anymore to tell her story. Do it for her." And finally, he did agree to do it. And I was very fortunate or very lucky, because I am actually the one behind the camera. I'm doing his interview for that. And,
Are you?
And so I look at it as like the most important interview that we got. I'm the one to actually do it. And it was an incredible experience, very emotional experience for Christopher. And the whole interview itself was probably 8 or 9 hours, something like that. So a very long day for him. And you're obviously only seeing snippets of what he said. But Christopher's a great guy. He is, obviously has a story to tell. He truly believes that, they experienced a haunting in that house, which forced them to flee after 28 days. And a lot of his story matches up with what his brother says, and a lot of his story doesn't match what his brother says. So it's really interesting. And I draw a little bit of the parallels back to, if you've seen The Haunting of Hill House, I believe it is, on Netflix, the series that came out a few years ago, where all of the siblings kind of all have a different story. They all experience the same things, but they all have a different story to tell. And that's kind of the way that I look at Danny and Christopher is they've got, they both lived through the same thing, but maybe saw things through different lenses and different perspectives. And so it's really, having sat down and actually talked to Danny and interviewed him in depth about this case, and then doing the same thing with Christopher. I'm probably only one of, one or two other people on the planet who's been able to do that. And it was just an incredible experience.
You say it was emotional. You could tell, because there's that one great scene where it is overwhelming, and he gets up and walks off. And then you guys don't. And I love that you don't cut for. I would expect a couple seconds, but that goes on for like 15 seconds. And the audience I'm watching like, oh man, we're not going to pull away from this thing.
Right.
So you guys really did that. That was impressive. And then, I really like the part about him talking about when they were moved in California, and he snuck into the movie theater, and he's talking about how he got to see the story. And he's like, it didn't take long for people to figure out who I actually was. And so that must have been a tough thing to have to deal with. That's not fun.
Those kids, they went through obviously a lot dealing with what they experienced in Amityville, in that house. But I think they went through the trauma they went through afterwards. That was living with the fact that they were these Amityville kids, and that there were a lot of really, there were a lot of different stories about what had really happened. Kids at school were picking at them and making fun of them and calling it a hoax, and these kids were saying, no, this stuff happened. And so they really, the trauma that they dealt with isn't even so much with what happened at that house. It's what happened after, and sort of living with this story, which I mean, any kid would probably have the same issues.
It's hard enough to get people to believe that now, like you and I try to do it, and then think about
Right.
being 8-10 years old. You forget it. That's impossible. Oh man.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
tech stuff, because I gotta know. And if you any info, what did you shoot this on? What cameras? Do you guys remember what your gear and your lights were for this stuff? Do you know?
Oh man, I couldn't even tell you. No, that would have been all with the cinematography, the cinematographer, and
that's my realm and my world. Yeah. So I'm just curious to what you
shot
with.
I don't know. I honestly don't know. That's not my world. That's so I don't know. I was just I was kind of like as an executive producer, I was just back behind the scenes, and I was just there to make sure that we're staying on track, we're staying focused on what this real story is. And the director Jack Riccobano, he did a good job with obviously following that story and making sure that we are telling it the way that it needs to be told, because many people have blown it out of proportion. Let's just not add to that pile. Let's do something different, and I think that's what we did.
For sure. No, that's cool. I mean, I just that's anyone I have somebody on here and we talk, I got to geek out to where you shot this with. What was your lens? I need to know.
I'm almost, I can't say this for a fact, but I'm almost positive it was a Red camera. But I can't.
I was going to get.
I can't tell you exact the model or lens or anything like that. But
I mean, I'm sure you guys shot it in 4K, obviously. But anyway,
yep,
that's stuff our audience probably doesn't care about. But anyway, I think there was a lot of good drone footage, I think, was in there too, of like the area, right? I believe too, which looked nice.
Yeah.
When is drone footage not a good idea?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. No, I was not a part of that, specifically shooting the drone footage, but yeah, they did some, to be honest with you, it's really interesting because the show changed and transformed from the original idea. Myself and my creative partner and executive producer, Brooklyn Hudson, she and I came up with the idea for this. And initially it was to essentially make like an investigative show. We were looking at it more of the like, hey, let's get this on History Channel or A&E or something like that, where you're taking somebody who has investigated this story for so long, and we're going to crack this case open, and we're going to really try to solve specifically what happened with the DeFeo family, and were they really gunned down by one person, or were there multiple people involved? And it was supposed to be a 2-season show, 2 10 episodes, or 2 seasons of 10 episodes each.
Ooh,
and
I would love to watch that.
Yeah, I mean, it would have been an awesome experience. But unfortunately, as things go in Hollywood, things transform, and they say, nope, nobody's really doing this style show right now. It's really more of this, this docu-series style, the cinematic, with a cinematic feel, and ultimately that's what we got. But I think we didn't so much do the investigation as we were intending to do. But again, just to be able to tell that story through a first person lens was, it was all we could have asked for, I guess.
But that's really cool. I mean, that to me is how I think. I mean, I used to love watching Ghost Hunters on Sci-Fi back in the day when it was such a big thing. I used to eat that stuff up, but I am more of a fan of, and the stuff I like to shoot, I like to do the more, I'm telling the story cinematically also. Mm-hmm. I like that as far as, I like it better than an investigative thing. But that being said, so was this something then that you pitched, or people knew what you were doing, so they brought you on board?
Yeah, so myself and Brooklyn, who's the other executive producer, and she helped create the show with me. We pitched it. So it was actually kind of interesting how we met, because she had almost bought the house back in the late 90s when it was for sale, and she had written a blog many years ago about kind of this strange experience that she had in the house at the time when she was there. And I was like, hey, I'd love to interview you. I'm a longtime researcher. I just kind of like hearing these little creepy stories or whatever about the house. So I ended up doing a quick interview with her, and one thing led to another. And she was like, and she's been living out in LA for like 30-40 years, long time. And she was like, hey, would you ever want to do a documentary on this? And she's involved in the industry. I was like, you know what? Yes, I would love to, but I've never had, I don't have the experience. I don't have the knowledge, nothing like that. Like I don't come from that background, and she does. So we made a really good tag team on this. And what we did is we ended up putting this show together. And again, at that time, it was the investigative style show. And we ended up pitching it. We pitched it to Netflix and Travel Channel and Hulu and Roku and Amazon. I mean, we pitched it to a whole bunch of people. And MGM was the one who ended up picking it up, or MGM Plus is where obviously it landed, and we were very happy with that. I mean, MGM Plus is a huge platform, and we're seeing all of these channels switch to their streaming streaming services. And originally it was I shouldn't say that it was MGM Plus at first. Originally it was Epix, who then was bought out by MGM Plus. So initially it was going to be on Epix, but then it transitioned over to MGM Plus. But yeah, we did all the pitching ourselves, and it was a fun experience, a wild ride, and really it was it's a COVID project, because it was right before COVID happened that Brooklyn and I met. And so we sort of planned this thing over the phone and over Zooms and things like that over COVID, and then started filming it obviously last spring, last summer.
So while we're hot on that topic, so producing and shooting films is challenging. It's hard. It can take a long time. It can be very frustrating. It can lead to many, many days of you want to rip your hair out and things don't go, like you say.
Right.
Things don't go the way you want. I just finished one that I had an idea how it was going to be, and I had to rebuild my entire project. I love it, but that happens, right? So what was something you wanted to, rip your hair out for, and what was something that you thought was just like, oh, this is so perfect? And how did the whole experience go for you? Because you hadn't really done something like that before. Yeah,
well, I think when it comes to ripping my hair out, I think I was ready to rip my hair out every single day at some point in time. I mean, it was, as you know, right? I mean, nothing ever goes according to plan, and you might have some great master plan, and then, somebody in the higher up says, nope, we're not doing that. We can't afford it, whatever it might be.
This is not going to affect my ROI, so we're not doing it.
Right. Yeah. And that's the thing is, we're obviously working within, we've got a budget, we've got, there's certain time constraints. We're working with interview subjects, things like that. So there were a lot of things that were struggles and were frustrations. I would say the biggest frustration of mine is I think there was just a lot that we still left off the table. And I would have loved to have even just extended that into a 6-part series versus a 4-part series. We did an interview with Brian Kelsky, who was the son of Bobby Kelsky, who was Ronnie DeFeo Jr.'s best friend. There was a lot to unpack there, and it just unfortunately didn't work to fit him into the 4-part series. But my belief is that Bobby Kelsky, who again was Ronnie DeFeo Jr.'s best friend, knew a lot more about the murders than he ever said. He died back in 2000 or 2001, and I'm not saying he was involved. I'm not saying that at all. But I do think he knew a lot more and was much more involved in perhaps the cleanup and things like that than we ever knew about. So we did interview Brian, who Brian did a whole bunch of research himself and had even talked to his dad on his deathbed about like, hey, what happened and what's the story? And so that interview never made it in. So that was probably the biggest frustration, or one of the biggest frustrations for me, that it was like, man, this is so important to the story, but we can't find a way to fit it in. And there were other interviews that we weren't able to get in there, and things that we were hoping to do. Like we had wanted to initially go in and do some DNA testing on like Don DeFeo's nightgown, because there's been a lot of reports that she was potentially involved. Ronnie claimed that she was involved at many different times. Yeah, and I'm not saying she was, I'm not saying she wasn't, but I do know that it would have been nice to at least get that nightgown tested for certain DNA and ballistics, particles and things like that to confirm whether or not she was actually involved. And we just weren't able to do that. So. But there were a lot of great things that happened too. I mean, we got some fantastic interviews, some people that had never spoken before. And, at the end of the day, I do believe this is the best series that will ever probably be done on Amityville, because at the end of the day, a lot of these people aren't going to be doing these interviews anymore. I mean, Christopher said, this is it. I'm not doing this ever again. So this is probably the last time we will ever hear from him, and hear from him as in depth, or at least hear from him as in depth as we did. So it was, overall, it was a great experience, a lot of frustrations, but a lot of highs as much as there were lows as well.
Fabulous. So you bring up an interesting thing that pops into my head then. When did Ronald DeFeo, did he die in 2018, 19? What year was it?
You know what? It would have been 2019 or 20. Yeah. It was around 19 or 20. I can't remember exactly. We were trying hard. We were going to try to get him hard into, or try hard to get him into this show.
That was my question. 2-part is, did you want him for this, obviously? And had you ever met him or spoke with him previously?
Yeah. So he was unfortunately probably one of, I've talked to literally everybody involved in this case, from William Weber to the Lutzes to, DeFeo family members who obviously survived or who are living relatives. I've talked to everybody involved in this case. Ronald DeFeo Jr., I had never talked to. I'd written to him several times, had told him that I would just like to speak with him about this. Yeah. And so it was, I mean, as much as I hate to say that it was a kick in the gut when he died, it was a kick in the gut when he died because, number one, we really wanted to get him for this series. But number two, I knew that the real story died with Ronnie DeFeo that day. So we will never know for sure what happened because he told so many different versions of this story. I mean,
crazy.
I think
he told,
I think the last time I counted,
it was like Charles Manson. He never told the truth about anything.
Right.
No,
I think the last time I counted, it was like 21 different versions of what happened that night. And here's the thing, Matt. I think there are certain pieces of every story that he's told that tell the real story, if that makes sense. But I don't think he's ever gone top to bottom and told exactly what happened. So that's where, in my mind, I've sort of put those pieces together over all the stories that he's told. And I think I have a pretty good idea of what happened. But again, the real story died with him that day. And that's why, it hurt for him to go because I never, that was the one person I never got to.
I know. And that's the thing, you say something funny. There's a good point in the film when that one woman is saying he reminded her of Charles Manson because he looked at the beard and the hair, but he was like him because he just rambled on and on about crazy shit. No one knew what he was talking about. No one believed him. But he does know what happened, and he's not going to. We don't know now.
Right.
But and I wonder. He was crazy, obviously, but like you said, it was kind of sad to see that him die in that sense. I think that makes sense because in a way, same with me when Manson died. I wasn't sad. I want to be very clear. I wasn't sad what he did.
Right.
But those are interesting, fascinating people because they have information about moments in history that they should talk about or they could talk about.
Right.
We want to know those things, right? Exactly. And they die, those things disappear.
Exactly. So, and I think for me, being so ingrained and entrenched in this subject for so many years and trying to, I probably wrote him over the course of a 20 plus year window. I probably wrote to him a half a dozen times trying to reach out and trying to get to him. Did you
ever get any reply from the prison or from him or anything?
Never. Nope. Never. I never did. No. And I was at one point, I was actually very close to one of his ex-wives who was in communication with him. And I was trying to kind of work that angle a little bit to see if she could potentially get me to speak with him. And I wasn't writing a book. I wasn't making a film. I wasn't doing anything. I was just an investigative journalist, if you will, or an investigator who was looking into this to say, dude, here's what I can tell you. I probably know more about this case than 99.9% of the people out there. And here's what I can tell you, X, Y, and Z. And here's what I think happened. You tell me what actually happened. And I would have never expected for him to open up because he didn't to anybody else. But I do think to have that opportunity to look him in the eyes and say, Ronnie, first off, this is bullshit what you said. This is bullshit what you said. And this is bullshit what you said. Here's what meet him. Well, yeah, exactly. And to try to get that, that real story out of him, even just from my own personal investigation, it would have been fascinating. But again, that real story died with him.
Speaking of that, too, did they never release a cause of death for him?
They never released a cause of death with him, but I did do again some investigating into that, and it was COVID was ultimately what got him.
Was that?
So he had the days prior to dying, he had, and again, this was COVID was what I was told by a former corrections officer who was working at the prison that he was at, was that COVID was basically running rampant through the prison system at that time. And that Ronnie 2 or 3 days before had spiked a incredibly high fever, that he was complaining of difficulty breathing. And you got to remember, Ronnie at that time I think he was 69. He had a lot of health problems, hepatitis C.
So he was almost in his
he had a whole bunch of other things going on. So he was primed to be, to be a victim of COVID, if you will. Right. So he had a lot going on, or a lot going against him. And it sounded like, from my understanding, he went into respiratory arrest in the back of the ambulance on the way to the hospital. They tried to, perform life-saving measures on him, but, we're not able to bring him back. So, and I don't know how hard. I mean, I'm not saying they didn't try to save his life, but I have no idea what that looks like with a mass murderer. If they get the same treatment as you or I would, I have no idea. But I'm fairly confident in saying that it was COVID that ended up killing him.
Interesting. Okay, that's probably what one of my guesses would have been anyway.
Yeah.
I think it's one of those situations where, like you said, it's a fascinating human being to learn about, but the reality is not many people are going to miss him now that he's gone, quite frankly.
Right.
So,
Right.
but,
Exactly. Yep. Exactly.
So what I loved was, we all know the story of what happened in the house. Okay. All the flies and the cold weather and George and the fireplace and all that. We don't need to, we know all that. But I thought it was great to learn about who George was and who Kathy was, and talking about all this meditation and all this stuff that was so big. And you guys did a great job of covering, like the tagline says, about what the world was like, what was actually happening in the set. George was riding choppers, and he was this interesting dude, and the satanic panic and all this stuff. That was so cool, because that's a part of the story that I had never heard from people. It's always just, here's this haunted house and thunder and lightning and it's scary. And it's like, well, there's more to it. You guys did that, and that was really cool.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so a lot of the research that I did prior to even getting involved with doing this docuseries was, who was George Lutz prior to Amityville, and I had in previous years, I had reached out to friends who I was able to figure out that they're friends with him. And I would. Did
you ever meet him, by the way? Did you say you met him?
George Lutz. I spoke to him, but I never met him in person. Okay. I did speak to him, but I never.
What about?
Nope.
And Kathy?
Same thing. Spoke to her on the phone, but unfortunately, never had the opportunity to meet her in person. Okay. But yeah, so I ended up chatting with a whole bunch of his friends, even an ex-girlfriend who he had after Amityville, because him and Kathy split up in the mid '80s. Right. And I started putting the pieces of the puzzle together that he knew a lot more about the occult and the paranormal than really anybody had ever.
It was really cool.
Yeah. And the thing is that his, Danny and Christopher were saying the same thing. They were saying, look, he knew a lot more about this, than he let on. And, there's even like Ed and Lorraine Warren, famed, demonologists and paranormal investigators, Ed and Lorraine Warren from the Conjuring series. They investigated the Amityville case back in March of 1976. And there is a photo that a lot of people never even looked at, but as I was looking at this photo a little bit closer, there's a book that is sitting on the coffee table that's called In the Name of the Devil. And it's this book about witchcraft. And I'm like, why in the hell would there be a book about witchcraft in that house? And they claim to not have any knowledge of the paranormal.
I need to own this. I need to buy this book.
Yeah, Ronald. It was a book by, his name is Ronald Seth, The Name of the Devil. Right. And it was like about like Scottish witches or something. I mean, it was just a very strange book. Yeah. But according to some of George's friends, that inside the house, there were dozens of these books, and there was a whole bookshelf, and Danny and Christopher said the same thing, that and in George's house that he lived in Deer Park before Amityville, that in his house he had like pictures, like demonic pictures up on his walls and things like that. Wow. Now again, these are not my words, these are what they're telling us.
Yeah.
But there was just a lot that we were starting to kind of uncover, that George knew a lot more than maybe what he let on, and that he didn't want to necessarily say that he knew more about this, because other people would potentially criticize him and say, well, you're just making this up. Mm-hmm. But I do believe, and Christopher, talks about this a lot, that they were doing transcendental meditation before and in the house. Yes. And transcendental meditation is a meditation where you're basically using names, and you're kind of saying names over and over and over again, there's this mantra with it. And what, according to Christopher and Danny, who both told me the exact same thing, is that George was saying names, but he was using demon names for some reason to conjure up demons. So I think when I look at Amityville, I look at it was just the perfect storm. That the Amityville is just a town. Amityville is just a place. The house at 112 Ocean Avenue is just a house where something really bad happened there, meaning the DeFeos. And I think you combine what happened with the DeFeos, the traumatic impact that maybe that left on that environment in that house, and combine it with somebody who's doing some stuff that's not so good and sketchy and potentially calling up demons. Like you're asking for trouble. And I think George just was experimenting. I don't think he meant to cause what happened at all. I really, truly don't believe that. But I think he opened that door, and it was really hard to close. And I think the family, even up until today, Christopher says there's some strange things that continue to follow him and happen to him. So I think that was just the door he was just never able to close.
That's wild. Yeah, that was such an interesting thing to see, because you Google Amityville horror on, do a search on that, you could sit there for the next 7 years of your life reading
Right.
stuff. It never ends, right? The rabbit hole is never ending.
Right.
So, but I don't know how much I had known about that before I watched this, honestly. So maybe it was a common thing. Maybe I don't know. But that was kind of news to me. I'm like, this guy was kind of into this stuff. So
yeah,
but
very
yeah,
interesting.
It was interesting to see what he did. And then, all right. So this is, how was anything else you wanted to add, like production wise or whatever, that I didn't touch on? But I mean, again, it's a 4-part series. Like I said, it could have been 6 easily. And
Right.
I thought it was really that good. And I know it's always so hard to cut stuff. Believe me, I know the feeling all the time. It's so hard to cut stuff out, and you're just like, God, I love that interview. I guess. Oh yeah. Besides Ronald DeFeo, right? Who, or if the Lutzes, if they had still been alive, who was around though that you were like, oh my God, I wanted this interview so badly? Was there anyone that you didn't get to talk to?
There was one friend of George's in particular who I had many conversations with. He was an old biker friend of George's, and he had not only been in the house and experienced things while the Lutzes were living there, but he had other things that happened to him after the Lutzes fled that were a direct result of what was happening in the house. He had a really wild, crazy story. He owned a garage. He was one of George's motorcycle buddies. He owned this motorcycle shop, and his name is Jim. And he said that there were crazy things going on, things that were levitating. There was a cross that actually blew up. A cross blew up and shattered into a whole bunch of pieces inside the garage. I mean, a lot of crazy stuff. But he was actually so afraid to go on camera and talk about this that he refused to do it. He said, he told me multiple times, you're messing with something you don't want to mess with. He's a very religious person, and good for him. He was very religious, and he said, you're messing with something you don't want to mess with. Leave it alone. And I'm not going to talk. He talked to me. I've known him for probably, I don't know, the better part of 10 years, talked to him many times. He's told me his story, but he would not go on camera to tell what happened so that the world could see it, because he just didn't want to, again, open that box.
That's really interesting. Yeah, there are plenty of people that have seen things. They just don't. They don't want to talk about stuff. They don't.
Right.
And that's okay. That's totally up to you, because some of that stuff is, they don't want to open it up and get it hatched again and get it going again. They don't want to do that. They're done with that.
Right.
So, all right. Well, but yeah, I mean, you guys did an incredible job of getting, neighbors, and I think did you guys have the reporter who did the seance on the news with them? You had them on this thing, I think, right?
Yeah, Laura DiDio and then Marvin Scott. They were both involved in that seance on March 6, 1976, when the famous Ghost Boy photo was taken, which, I don't know if you've seen it, but my opinion is it was it was not a ghost. It was actually another investigator who was there that night. But
it was their audio guy or something like that.
It's been blown way out of proportion over the years, and it's a very creepy photo, but it's very easily explainable if you start to compare the Ghost Boy to a lot of photos of this other person who was there that night. So so we interviewed a whole bunch of people. We really wanted to leave no stone unturned with this, and there were many. I don't say many, but there were several interviews that we would have loved to have gotten into this, but we just couldn't. And that, like Brian Kelsky, he was one of them. I was so disappointed when I heard that he was just not going to be able to make the cut, because to open up that can of worms with Bobby Kelsky and to tell that story of the relationship between him and Ronnie DeFeo. And then there's mob ties that were in there, which is like a whole nother thing.
Oh yeah. DeFeo's dad, right?
Yeah. So to do that, it was just going to be, we didn't have time to unpack all that, unfortunately. But very pleased with how it turned out. There's always things you wish you could have done differently or added or, maybe pulled away from, but very, very pleased with how it worked.
Good. And that's at the end is, the last thing you want to be is, unhappy with how this went and, write it off and not want to be a part of it, obviously. So, yeah. Very, very good. I was going to ask you something about, so I've been interested in this forever, and I don't know if there's a reason, maybe whatever, but what are the odds one day we get a film that can touch a little bit on the Lutzes and whatever, but are we going to get a film or something one day that is just about the DeFeos and what happened in that house?
Yeah, I mean, I would love. I mean, we've seen Amityville 2: The Possession, which was blown way out of proportion. That was about the
Something
Montellis,
right.
which
That
was the
was
DeFeos, right?
right. That was
And then
it
recently there
wasn't
was
it
a
was crazy.
right. Recently there was another movie that came out. I believe it was called The Amityville Murders, which again was a very fictionalized version of the DeFeo story. Um,
Mhm.
the story of the DeFeos is so unbelievable that I don't know how we haven't gotten somebody to do just an actual
That's what I'm
nonfiction.
saying. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe we need to do it, Matt. Maybe that needs to be our
Yeah,
thing. We need
man.
to. Yeah, but
I am
I don't know, man.
absolutely.
I would love to see it because I think you combine the fact that you had this family that was completely wiped out in one single night by supposedly one person. You have the mob ties, you have the haunting thing that came after. I mean, it really was just this perfect storm that I don't think we'll never see another Amityville. We just won't because
No.
you
No.
to have six people be murdered and a year later a new family moves in and 28 days later they move out. I mean that is a horror movie. They make movies like that. That's not a
Yes,
real
all the time.
story, and it was a real
Yep.
story. So it was just I don't think we'll see another Amityville ever again, but I do think that the story of Amityville will live on far beyond us. I think
Oh,
for
it'll
years and years, people
forever.
are going to be
Oh
talking about
yeah.
this.
Oh my God, yes. So let me get you out of here on this one. So you've
Yeah,
been to the house, you've been in the house, you were able to create this. You're an expert on it at this point. This is a hard question. I guess I'm trying to ask multiple things, but the overall is, what do you think happened? Okay, we know what happened to Feos. There were murders. Okay, we don't know what happened with Ronnie. We'll never know. Like you said, he's gone. We can't do that. People nowadays, owners say nothing bothers them. What do you believe happened in that house? Was this cooked up because George Lutz was broke? Was this ghosts? What do you think? What do you think?
yeah. So I think there was a couple things. I think number one, I don't believe the Lutzes ever moved into that house with the intention of creating a ghost story. I don't think that. I think there were things that
I don't think so.
happened to the Lutzes that specifically was some of this transcendental meditation thing stuff where things just grew and blew up out of proportion. And I think things did happen to them. I believe that house at one time was haunted, and maybe not so much the house, but the people in
Mm.
that house were haunted. Because when the Lutzes left, I really truly believe that whatever it was did leave with them. But the reason why I say that something happened to them is because what a lot of people don't realize, just like the story I just told about Jim who owned the motorcycle shop, this was the haunting expanded outside of just the Lutz's small bubble. I mean, it was not just contained to their family. There were other people, friends and other family members who experienced things not only during those 28 days in the house, but then afterwards as well, that things happened to them. So something happened to that family. I have no question in my mind that something drove them from that house. But I will say that I think once they found out how many people were fascinated by this story and that they started seeing some dollar signs, things blew up, things got out of
Yeah.
hand, and I think there was even there was a reporter who was on scene for the March 6, 1976 investigation who actually claimed, and this is another one we didn't get to interview, but he actually claimed that he found a book contract in the house, which means that they would have had a book contract before they left the house. Not saying, again, that they moved into
Wow.
that house to do it, but I think once they realized sort of what they had, they were like, hey, this could be our meal ticket. And they obviously promoted the hell out of
Yeah.
the books and the movies and things like that. And even up until George died, he was still very active in trying to build on that story and create fictional movies. And I
Yep.
don't believe the Lutzes are liars, but I do believe they embellished, meaning George and Kathy. I'm not saying they're liars, but I do believe they embellished some of the things that happened to them just to make that story sound a little bit more appealing to the audiences, and maybe try to take advantage of like The Exorcist, which had come out only a few years prior, and again they saw what this was doing to the nation. It took the nation by storm, and they saw their meal ticket, and that's what they did. But I do believe something did in fact happen to them in that house.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting because everybody's got a different take on it. So yeah,
Right.
something did. Look, you can't hate on them for being an opportunist, right? I mean, like you said, if I'm going to get paid for this to write a book, heck yeah, I'm going to do it. I'm
Right.
sorry, like I'm just going to do it, right?
Right.
I'm
Right.
going to do it.
Yep.
And you know what? It all worked out. He got rich, and we have a great story to tell, like you said, forever and ever and ever.
Right.
So,
yep, exactly.
hey,
and here's the other thing too is that having sat down with both Danny and Christopher and looking them in the eye, like you can tell when somebody is lying to you. You can tell when somebody's trying to embellish something. These guys are not embellishing anything, and Christopher more so than Danny. Christopher was only 7 at the time. So what do you really remember from when you were 7? Maybe not a whole lot, but I'm telling you, when you see a ghost or a shadow figure, or your bed moves or windows open and close, those are things that you are going to remember because they're very traumatic, very impactful moments in your life. Yes. And for him to sit here as a grown man who's now in his 50s and go, I'm telling you, this stuff happened to me. If it, like, I don't have any reason to make it up. He's not making any money from this. Right. He's not doing anything. Right. He's just saying this happened, right? And so I believe something happened to him.
Ooh, well, so it's Amityville, an origin story, and it's a 4-part wonderful documentary on the Amityville horror. You should definitely watch. MGM Plus. I don't know anywhere else. Maybe it'll be somewhere else at some point. Blaine Duncan, thank you very much. This is fabulous. One more time, shout out. Where can people find you and what you guys do, though, also besides this?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. I appreciate it. I appreciate you having me on the show and getting the opportunity to talk about this. I'm, as you can see behind me, I'm a big Halloween fan, big Michael Myers fan. My brother and I have a podcast called Halloween Lives Podcast, Halloween.lives.podcast on Instagram. You guys can check us out there. Go on to YouTube and type in Halloween Lives Podcast. You'll find us there. And big horror fan, big lover of the paranormal. So just trying to keep that going and keep that passion in my life alive.
Good. Yep. And if you guys listened on our episode, of course, you heard the episode we did with him and his brother on all the Halloween. So go and listen to it if you haven't. But you guys know, for us, of course, you guys know we're on Instagram. You guys know we're on Facebook. scarymovieproject@gmail.com. Email us. Tell us what you want. Should we make an Amityville film about the Lutzes? What should we do? Give us comments, suggestions of what you guys want to do. But until next time, as they say for Amityville, for God's sake, get out!
The Scary Movie Project podcast. Learn more at thescarymovieproject.com.